Joining us on the show today is somebody that I have deep respect for and someone I've been interviewing for over a decade now and been watching her journey and her success after success, several milestones. Ameera Shah, Managing Director, Metropolis Healthcare, a multinational chain of diagnostic labs. She's built this ground up and she's been listed on the most powerful women lists, national lists and global lists year after year. She's achieved Young Leader Awards globally. She's been on the EY Entrepreneur of the Year Award. She's on the Hurun's Rich list. And Metropolis, which is now publicly listed, has a market cap of 8,500 crores last I checked. So gives you an idea of the kind of person that we're dealing with, someone who's so driven, and really someone who can create a phenomenal impact. Ameera is also just in her 40s. So, Ameera, thank you for being with us on the show.
Thanks, Aabha. So sweet of you.
So, while we've discussed this, many people still don't know your story. And I'd love to touch upon some of those key inflection points. But before I do that, congratulations.
Thank you.
And it's great to see you, ready to be a mom again. This is the second time now.
That's
so
right.
It must be a very exciting time.
It is an exciting time. And to what you alluded to being in the 40s, from the age of like 21 till 40, my first baby was always Metropolis, and I was completely consumed. While I had relationships, but I really never thought about family, kids. I wasn't in that situation, and it's been very lucky that in our 40s we've been able to still, have children.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's suiting you. You're so happy, and I love these big life changes because we'll go reverse actually today. Let's start with what's happening now. You listed Metropolis in I think 2019, just pre-COVID, and also got married around that time, and had your first child. Did life change dramatically, both professionally and personally?
So marriage didn't change anything because Hemant and I had been together since 2010, and so. We were already part of each other's lives completely. So really, I don't think marriage changed anything. But, really, I would say the marriage happened with the very clear reason of also wanting to have children. And therefore, literally, we got married in Jan 2019. We went public. Metropolis went public in April 2019. And we went and got pregnant in June 2019.
Wow. That's a lot.
So my husband always makes fun of me because when I remember telling him we were on an Indigo flight, and I told him, I said, listen, this is what I'm thinking. He said, what? I said, let's get married in Q4. Q1 I'll go public, and then Q2 we'll have a baby. He just looked at me in shock. He was ready to throw the coffee at me.
That's so you.
But hey, I was a good planner. Yeah. That's exactly how it happened, and
you manifested it. Yeah. So, and how important was it to have a partner that is, on your side in a sense, like someone who sees the vision the way you do? Because I'm sure, managing everything. You're managing a listed company. We had COVID in the middle, and I remember speaking to you at the time, and you were just overwhelmed. While you were at the forefront of course, trying to help the regulators and doing whatever was required to make sure people got what they needed on ground. At the same time, you were, a very new mom. So you need a partner that can really support you at a time like that. And I'm asking because many women don't know how to find that right mix. How did you guys manage it all?
So what you're referring to is 2020. Karma, my son, was born 9th March 2020, and COVID, we went in lockdown on 23rd. Yeah. And I had actually planned that in 20 years I've never taken more than a week off or 2 weeks off as holiday. Yeah. And I said I'm going to take 45 days off maternity leave, and I'm not going to do calls, I'm not going to do
45
anything.
45 days, firstly, let me soak that in. Yeah. 45 days as a luxury for Ameera, yes. Okay.
So I was very excited about this time that I could just be with my child and not have to sort of also do work reviews, meetings, etc. But of course, all of that went straight down the tube when COVID hit. Because the national requirement was for all of us as healthcare leaders to stand up and say how are we going to help the government to solve for this. So literally the day I came back from the hospital, which was the 12th of March, from the 13th, I was on calls for multiple hours a day We were trying to work with the government to get the regulation and the policy in place for COVID testing. We were the first ones, Metropolis was the first ones to start COVID testing in India. To get the whole private sector to come and align with the government and to set all the policies took a lot out of all of us in those 10 days to get testing started by the 23rd of March. So it was what was needed, but what that meant was that I had to now juggle two balls, very intense healthcare business in the, and like for everybody, our revenues had fallen 70%. Our employees were stuck at home, but we still had to stand up and go and provide COVID service, start COVID services and then provide them all across the country. The government's rules and regulations changed every day. All across the country, and at the same time I had to manage my newborn baby. So it was a challenge. It was certainly, and there were days I was overwhelmed, there were days I broke down, but I would say 95% of the time it was just it was the sheer will of saying, look, these both have to be done, and now it's a way of figuring out what's the way to do it. And the question about the support is incredibly important. Because while Hemant, couldn't do much from a feeding perspective or any of those perspectives, but his emotional availability to me at the time, my parents were also with us and we were all in our farmhouse lockdown, was incredible. So just to have that emotional support system. And look, I don't think these things happen automatically. I don't think there are any two people in the world who have exactly the same vision of life and exactly the same thoughts about everything. The important thing is, I think, for women like us who have their own dreams, who have our own desires, who have our own choices, our own options, is to find hopefully a partner who's secure in themselves and who has their own life and doesn't get threatened by the fact that their wife or their partner has dreams which are different from theirs, and the ability to for both to live their own lives, do their own things, but still come together as a unit, to still come together as a family. I think, at least that's for me, that was the kind of partner I was looking for, which I found.
Oh, absolutely. Are you a very hands-on mom still?
We are both
I don't think you're going to have
hands-on
much of an
parents.
option very soon.
Yeah, no, but we are both hands-on parents actually. In the way that, you want to not be a helicopter parent in the way of being completely micromanaging about every small thing, but it's about, at least for me, it's about picking the things that are important at this age. And so what that means is, kids at this age need a lot of time. They need a lot of love. They need a lot of feeling of security, a feeling of safety. So that's very important to give. So I've chosen how I'm going to do that with Karma. Also things like no technology are important to me. Things like his no sugar and quality of what he eats at this point is important to me. So the things that are important to us as parents, we are focusing and micromanaging, I would say. And the things that are not so important, like we're not honestly one of those like overachieving parents for our children where we're like, oh, my kid has to learn to read by the time he's 3 and my kid has to be a super genius by the time he's 4. I am not interested, so.
No, that's great, because sometimes if parents are high achievers, there's a likelihood that you'll want you'll sort of pass that on to your kids, or have like high expectations of what they should be doing with their time or where they should be by a certain time.
Yeah, no, I'm of the firm belief that, I can't remember where I read this. I think it was partly in the Gita, it was partly in other books, but your children come through you, but they're not yours. You're safeguarding them, and they have their own lives to live. And as much as you want to give your values and you try, but finally we can't impose our lives and our thoughts on somebody else. And I'm of that firm belief.
Right. So what's a day in a life like for Ameera?
So I would say since in the last few years, currently, mornings 6:15, my kid comes to our room. He sleeps with us for an hour. Then we get him ready for school. He's out of the door by 8:15. Post which I get to read my papers, have my breakfast, do all of that. Some days I do yoga in the morning, some days in the evening. And I usually start my day by 9:30.
Okay.
So that's usually, my work day starts, and I try to work in the mornings because he's busy in school. So I work till about 12:31 till he comes back. I'm usually home for lunch with him. And then again I start working from about 2 to 2:30, and I work till evening time. And I'm doing partly, a lot of it is obviously physical and in the office, and some of it is virtual. So that's the day. Evenings, like I said, yoga, walk, any of that. Chess is through the day whenever I get 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And evening sometimes, with friends, sometimes with family, sometimes just the two of us.
Okay. So when you came back to India, you'd studied at University of Texas. And of course, you went to Harvard later for the promoter owner program as well. But you came back, you were working at Goldman, and then you decided investment banking wasn't for you. You come from a family of doctors, very accomplished doctors and people in the medical field. You decided to come back and go into your dad's business from a business point of view, in the sense you wanted to get in there, figure it out, learn how it works. And then you took on the enormous task of actually expanding it. Go back and share with us what it was like coming back when you were still a younger, it's almost 20 years ago now, and kind of, getting everyone to buy into your vision. Was it very organic? Did you spend a lot of time with the senior management? Did you come with ideas already? Did it take a little while to grow into them? How did it happen?
So this was 2001 that I came back, and at the time it was actually a doctor's practice. It was not a business, right? So there were it was my father, and there were 40 technicians who were actually doing the tests. There was no senior management, there were no systems, processes from a business. It was not really a business. It was, like I said, a medical practice, right? So I think the lucky part and the advantage I had was that my father, being a pathologist and being a medical and a very accomplished medical doctor, had a very clear viewpoint on what makes us differentiated from a scientific perspective. And that's what he had built for 20 years before I came back, and had built a successful, thriving practice for himself. But he's not a businessman, right? So his own ideas and sense of how to take this to the next level is something he had tried, he had experimented with, he had hired a CEO at one point, he had tried to do it on his own, but had not really worked for him the way that he wanted to. So I think the combination and synergy of our skills, him bringing the scientific side, me bringing the business knowledge, was very helpful in then taking Dr. Sushil Shah's lab to become Metropolis, and then actually become the institution it is today.
Right.
So I mean, initially in those days, luckily we had a similar vision of wanting to expand and grow, but obviously we had completely different styles, because we come from such different backgrounds, right? A medical and a business. So the first few years we worked closely together, where he continued to bring the medical side of it and I brought the business side of it. And I was doing basic things, I mean, the time we didn't have computers, we didn't have emails, we didn't have, I didn't have a HR manager to hire people, putting some files in place, putting some processes for purchase in place, like very basic things that you do in an organization. And then I started saying, let me now start expanding and growing organically. We had one lab at the time, which was in South Bombay. And while it had a good reputation and was picking up samples from other labs in the city and few other cities as well, but it had to now grow in physical presence all across. And it was primarily a B2B lab. So 75% of the revenue came actually from other hospitals and labs. Only 25% came from actually patients walking in. So we started expanding it. And of course, it's been a long journey. I can't cover that in a few minutes, but by 2004, I would say in the 3-4 years, he was wise to understand that we have very different styles of operating, and you can't have two chefs, stewing the same broth. So he was very kind and gracious to actually take a step back and become non-executive.
Wow.
And
you were how old at this time?
I was 24.
24.
So, fortunately, because we were shoulder to shoulder in building this ground up,
he had that.
There was not the sense, it was not like an existing business that existed and I was like the second generation coming into it.
Got it.
So I think that trust from early on, that look, she knows what she's doing, was there because we were actually doing it together.
And was this because also you always displayed some of those traits in terms of, you've always been, your acumen or being sort of very ambitious in terms of getting things done. So was it because he always had those traits, or was it also the grooming you got from education and when you came back and, displaying some of those analytical skills or having a plan, or was it a mix?
I think it's a combination. So in school, if I go back now, I was never a great student. Academically, I would say mediocre. I was average. I was never really interested in topping my classes and acing my exams and all of that stuff. But what I was very interested in was leadership And I was always a vice captain, captain, nominated for head girl, etc., right? I was always the leader of my group. So I was always playing sports, I was doing extracurricular. So I think the leadership skills actually started developing early on from school and college. And I think my parents could probably see me in that light from a very early age. I think also, with leadership, if you have the ability to develop emotional intelligence on how to engage with people, how to work with people, that helps. So, I don't know what they saw and didn't see, but I was certainly not somebody who was expressing great ambition or great aspiration. But I did have the vision of saying I wanted to make this a national chain, and I want to do something different with it.
Okay.
So, I don't know, but either way, I think our time of working together those 3-4 years, I think there was enough trust. And he's also not my father's not a control freak at all. Very unlike most fathers.
Right.
He's not a control freak at all. He's very happy to let go and very happy to let somebody else do the work.
Okay.
So it worked for both of us.
Did you have any mentors at that time or even later through the journey that you feel helped or guided you in terms of your growth?
So unfortunately at the time, Aabha, no, because my parents being doctors, they knew lots of doctors. Right. Even today they know lots of doctors, but they're not been ever part of the business community. And I don't have anybody in my family who does business either. So I never had any chachas or mamas or anybody around that I could actually reach out and ask for advice. So it was a very lonely journey from that perspective, that whatever you do on your own, with your own thought process, with your own common sense, and you just go.
Right.
And hope to God that hopefully most of the decisions are better than worse. But I think later in life, I would say between 2000 and around 2014-15, I started realizing, or a little earlier than that, I started sort of realizing that I need people around me who've had more experience, who've had more wisdom because of experience and the things they've gone through. And for critical decisions in my life, I need people I should be able to reach out to and have a chat with. And I started developing some of those relationships around 2012, 13, 14, I would say. And when I came to critical junctures in my life, there were people that I reached out to who were very helpful in giving me advice that really stuck with me. One of them was very clearly Deepak Parekh, who in 2015, when I was at that critical juncture of deciding, look, I'm thinking about taking this debt and buying over stake, etc. And he gave me good advice, where first thing he did was, it's not like he gave me money or he gave me any of those things. There was nothing tangible, but the intangible help that I got of him spending 30 minutes a week with me and just not poo-pooing my idea of saying what is wrong with you, but actually saying, okay, let's figure out a way, how do we do this? And every time I would go back and I would bounce an idea off him, he was very encouraging and supportive and helpful to me. And he gave me very good advice, which I'll never forget. He said, Ameera, you're about to take a huge leap, because I was about to take a humongous risk. I was pledging 100% of my shares. I was going to take 600 crores of personal debt on my name with a personal guarantee at the age of 33 or 34. I was going to take a mammoth risk, and if I was betting wrong, I was going to lose it all, not only for me, but for my family. Right? And I mean, they would have been pretty much without anything. So he gave me the risk and he said, listen, to fly high, you need a safety net. So create a safety net for yourself. He said, take out X amount of money at this point from whatever investments, real estate, whatever you have, and put it into FDs and put it into secure investments. Because if you know that you have a security blanket, right, that even if everything else fails, you have this amount of money that will take care of your family and you, that will give you the ability to take more risk. And that was actually great advice.
That's a phenomenal advice. Actually.
Absolutely. So I think learning from other people has always been something I do better than learning from books. So I would much rather go to people who I trust, who I respect, and try to get sort of their pearls of wisdom and use it in my life.
I think that's great advice even for others as they're on their journey now, to understand that so many times these nuggets reach you in other ways and not necessarily from, like you said, a boss or an immediate head. What made you take that risk though? What were you trying to achieve at that time?
I had seen, and like I referred to, Metropolis has been my baby. And I really, a lot of people can't understand this because they say, what do you mean, a child and a company can't be looked at the same way? But I've put so much of my emotional energy into Metropolis for 20 years of my life, and I continue to, but for the first 20 for sure. that for me it really is like my child. Like there's such an emotional attachment, so much of myself I've given, that I was seeing the company for 10 years stagnate, get choked and suffocated, because there was not a clarity in terms of leadership.
Okay.
And there were unfortunately hostilities at the board level, etc.
Okay.
And the idea of not letting Metropolis reach its real destiny,
Sure.
and not let it actually have its own journey was really uncomfortable for me. Along with that, I got put into a situation where somebody else who was on the board was basically trying to sort of arm twist me into a situation which was not good for the organization.
Okay.
So really I had no choice at the point, and the only choice I had was to just go along for the ride and let somebody else determine the fate of Metropolis and me, or take the bull by the horns and actually decide my own fate. And I've been always very clear that I would rather punt on myself,
Yeah.
and rather than just lay back and say, oh, I'm a victim of the situation and now what can I do?
Sure.
So me actually going from 36.5% shares and taking the 600 crore debt to buy 27% more was really me saying, I believe in this business. I believe in me leading this business. And I think I can do much more with this if we are out of conflict. And if that means I have to pledge everything,
Wow.
and if that means I have to put my money where my mouth is and prove it to myself first before anybody else, then I'm willing to take that punt. That's really what I was trying to accomplish.
That's a huge bet on yourself. I think that's admirable, and I mean, we've all seen how it's paid off, of course. It was the right bet to take. But did you always have that confidence in yourselves? I'm asking because, for those that are still nervous, not just because of the financial risk, but also to be able to take that bet on themselves. Everyone today is so self-critical, or they're, like you said, so many people are always putting you down. How do you manage to stay resolute in the face of that? Because there's so much self-doubt.
But to be honest, Aabha, I also had a lot of self-doubt. I mean, I was not a very confident person at all. In fact, I had imposter syndrome, I had self-doubt, I had lots of these issues in my mind, even when I was making these decisions.
Right.
In fact, my original aspiration was I'll buy 2% more of the company, right? Then having people around you who actually believe in you makes a big difference.
Okay.
So it was actually Hemant, my husband, who pushed me and said that, look, you're dreaming too small. Think bigger. Why are you thinking of only buying 2%? Do more. Right? So having people who sometimes see something in you that you may not see it yourself because you have self-doubt is helpful. But after that, somebody can give you an idea. But after that, do you have the courage to confront it, to face it, to explore it, and to find a way through it? Because it was a very difficult journey to go from that idea to the execution of what I did. That was all me. But the ideation and the support along the way was people around me, right? Also, to be okay with the fact that there is fear. And I love this quote, I don't remember who it's by, but talking about how courage is not the absence of fear, but it's the ability to see the fear and get over it, right? So it's not that if you're nervous or you have self-doubt, you should not do something. In fact, that's all the more reason to do it. Because that's the only way to get to the other side of confidence and to get over that self-doubt is to say, I'm nervous, I accept it, I'm fearful, I'm terrified. I used to wake up, I remember in those months when I was doing this whole thing, I used to wake up every day at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning, panicking, with sweat running down and wondering, what am I doing, right? But going back to sleep, waking up in the morning, and actually going and doing the action reduces nervousness and self-doubt and hopefully brings you to the side of success where then you feel much more confident.
So some people assume that because of a certain privilege, they just assume that why would somebody work so hard? Or then they assume that maybe one got it easy.
Oh, you're so pretty, why do you need to work?
Right? And like you said in the beginning, I found that interesting. It's not like you enter thinking that tomorrow I'm going to be, a billion-dollar company. You enter just knowing you wanted to grow it or expand it. But is there anything wrong with having that vision? Because so many times you're told, it's okay now, like you've got to, from A to B, why do you need to go up to X, Y, Z?
See, again, I think it depends on how much what is your own conviction and vision for your life versus what other people tell you should be your vision for your life, right? So as women in India, it's expected that you only work because you need to.
Yes.
Otherwise, if you're attractive or pretty and you get married to a rich man and then, life is made, why do you need to do it? I mean, that was never my thought of life in the first place. My mother is far too independent and progressive a woman for me to have had that thought, right? I've always seen her be passionate about what she does, be purposeful about what she does, and it had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with using her brain cells and with making herself a better version of herself, right? And finally impacting society by doing it. So I think for me it was never a doubt in my mind that it was never a choice of saying, am I going to stay at home and marry some rich man and be taken care of, or am I going to work? I think that was very sorted for me because I had a mother who was such a great shining example for me, right? But I think the question was really, do you then just do a job? Means, do you just work because you're looking for money and because you feel I need to be independent, which is a good enough reason? Or are you privileged enough to say, I don't need to work just for money and now I can aim for something bigger? And I think I was privileged enough to say that I don't have to work to make ends meet. I have food on the table, I have a roof over my head, I have a car to sit in and go, thanks to my family. But now, what is it that I can do with my education and my platform to do something much greater? And that depends, I think, on your purpose of life.
Absolutely. You raised 3 rounds of funding, including, of course, as you said, you dealt with a lot of private equity folks, and you raised 3 rounds of funding, which was significant. Talk us through the phases, inflection points, because as young girl, attractive girl, like you said, out there speaking to all of these sort of prominent people in a very male-dominated ecosystem of venture funding. Was it challenging to convince them of your potential? Did they buy into the business idea? Did they ask any sort of difficult questions? Was there any bias? Did you have to kind of find a way to manage the dynamics, or was it smooth sailing?
It's never smooth sailing. There's always ups and downs along the way. I remember the first round of funding was 2005 when I started talking to private equity companies. And we finally closed the deal with ICICI Ventures in 2006. During that journey, I remember private equity was new in healthcare. There was only one company who had done it 3 months before us. So we were actually going through the process together. So healthcare was a new industry. It was not a shining industry yet. It was still a very early industry. So private equity deals had not happened really. That was one thing. The second thing is we were trying to build something which had never been done before, which is a chain of labs. That was the first in India. And then of course along the way you have a young woman, etc. So there were multiple different lenses around which a private equity look at it. I think the first and the second, we were able to build enough conviction with people because we could clearly articulate the opportunity. We could very clearly talk to them in a way that we could build trust. So I think that part I managed to cross reasonably easily on the industry, on the business. The third part, I think there was some nervousness around, oh, you're 22, 23, 24. What happens if you get married? Are you going to work? What happens if you have children? Da da da. And I find many women getting very offended by these questions. And it's fair to be offended by these questions, but the reality is that is the landscape of our country. So my choice was not to be offended, and my choice was to just answer them directly and talk about who I am, what I believe in, and what I'm trying to do. And I think that was convincing enough for people that I didn't have to do anything more than that. So I think, for me, it's just been about being authentic, being who I am, putting it out there. Some people will like it, some people will not like it, and that's okay. That's how the first round of equity happened. The second round was a little bit more complicated because we had, like I said, this conflict and confrontation going on within the organization. And when one private equity is selling to another, any buyer who comes in doesn't want to get involved in conflict. So in many ways, we had to keep it under wraps and not let that conflict be showing to outside people. so that the first private equity could sell to the private equity, the second.
Sure.
But at the same time, I had to manage it in such a way that I was legally and structurally getting ready to solve that confrontation in the future. So that was a little bit more tricky and complicated journey at that time, but managed to again go through it. I didn't find any gender bias at that point. I think because the company had already been established, we had gone through one round of equity, so there was some proven track record. By the time we came to the third round of equity, was actually where the hostile investor we had in the business was selling to the private equity play. So this was not a private equity selling to private equity, but it was the hostile investor selling to private equity. And in that situation, it was very complex because we were all stuck in a legal tangle. There was very difficult negotiations. There was too much ego at the back end. So it was a very complex situation. But again, I think in partnering with the private equity and working together with them and really going through it, we managed to really get out on the other side where we came to a cap table where then I owned like 65 odd percent and the private equity owned 35%. So we came through a very complicated journey. But I think there were 2-3 lessons I learned along the way. One thing was that I find often Indian promoters are so interested in lining their own pockets and their own piggy banks that often they forget that your reputation precedes you. And the biggest thing I did for ourselves, which was helpful, was make a lot of money for our investors. So the fact that ICICI Ventures, Warburg Pincus had made a lot of money and spoke well of me as a promoter, the fact that they found me transparent, the fact they found me honest, was very important in getting the third round of equity investor, right? So your history is very important in, as you know, if you want people to line up, right?
Building that credibility.
And then you know, I got 600 crores of structured debt on my personal name from KKR, right? Again, not something done easily, very difficult to do. How did it happen? It happened again because there were 3 rounds of equity guys who all spoke well of me. So I think that was one learning. I think the second learning was about patience. Often our emotions, you know, I was already frustrated by 2007, but I finally got freedom from the situation in 2015.
Wow.
Okay, so I had
That's a long
almost
time.
13 years of conflict, right, before I actually got the organization to be free of those chains. And even after being free of those chains, it's not like we didn't have problems, because the hostile investor then went and broke his non-compete, non-disrupt, poached our people, stole our business, did all kinds of stuff right after the transaction happened, right? And he had gotten extra money for it. But so the conflict went on then also, right? So I think somewhere learning to live with the conflict, accepting that this is how it is, this is how somebody else chooses to behave, but I don't have to behave in that way. I can behave higher, I can be smarter, I can be not as petty, and not allowing your emotions to get the better of you. I think that was a big learning lesson for me, because often what happens is we get so frustrated and then we burst. Right, and then we can't control our emotions. So
there's so much learning here in all that you've just described, because A, that it wasn't one smooth ride, you know, there's so much that has happened over time. B, the fact that it's really, you know, business credibility and how you function as a leader that holds you in good stead. I'm very happy to hear there was no gender bias, because it doesn't have to be about gender. And I think it's important to show that if you do have a solid idea and track record, then nothing can stop you. And as you said, emotionally being able to manage this entire conflict, because women very often are accused of being emotional, you know, or being reactive. So having been through this journey and having gotten to the other side gotten to the other side in a very professional way, I think says a lot.
And I think the journey is all about your own self-awareness and how you control your emotions, right? And I think the thing we struggle with as women sometimes is, you know, what we call in children as big feelings. You know, suddenly feelings become big, they overwhelm us, and then we don't know how to communicate that. And we are called reactive, and we are said she's emotional, and she cries, and she screams, and she does this, and she does that, right? So I think that ability to watch your feelings, and before they become bigger than you, calm them down, manage them, understand them, diagnose them, I think is a very important part of the journey. And look, it took me a very long time. It's still work in progress, but it took me a very long time, almost I would say 10 years of counseling, of going at it, of understanding my thoughts and feelings to be able to really be able to manage them better.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing this with us. Being the head of a listed company, just to, you've always had a I'm going to do what I want attitude. Has it changed anything?
Being publicly listed certainly puts more limitations on you from one, obviously a regulatory context, from everything has multiple effects. So as a private company, you can say something in the public domain and it doesn't really, somebody may like it, somebody may not like it, but it doesn't land up impacting your business immediately. That's different in a public company. It's not only what you say, it's what you do. So I think you have to be far more thought through and more careful in how you articulate things and how you position not only the business, the brand, but also yourself. So certainly you have to be more careful. But having said that, you don't want to lose the crux of who you are.
Exactly.
So it's about picking and choosing what you choose to be authentic about, and where you're going to draw the line on things that you're going to keep slightly more close to your chest. And I think that's the journey and the lessons that you learn along the way of where you open up and where you don't.
You've always said, it was more about impact for you. You've always said that. You said early days you used to reinvest everything back into the business. It wasn't so much about material success. Even in your free time now, in terms of even after all this success, I know that you'd rather be on your farm with your dogs or your family, and it's not about any major kind of acquisitions and things like that for you. What is impact for you now going forward? How are you continuing to give back? What more would you like to do?
So I continue to be super driven. I continue to be having big dreams that things I want to do. The nature of those dreams change and that evolves, and I think that's nice because then you have different phases and chapters of life, right? Otherwise, I feel like people who have the same, like let's say if it's a business and you just want to grow the same business, like at least I can't imagine doing that 80 years of my life, having only, I want to just grow the business, right? So Metropolis is always important to me and it'll always be core for me, and there's a lot more I want to do with it. So if I look at impact in Metropolis, the lucky part that we are in is that we're in healthcare, and frankly just what we do has an impact on people's day-to-day life. And I see that. I mean, frankly, more than any award, more than any listing, what's most meaningful to me is when I meet a customer or a patient who's had cancer, mother had cancer, somebody in the family struggled, and we were able to help them get the right diagnosis, and not only get the right diagnosis, but we were able to engage with them in a way that they felt taken care of. And that led them to then go on to hopefully resume their health and get better and whatever it was. So I think those words of gratitude that come through from consumers who've gone through a difficult time are far more meaningful to me and my team than honestly any award, right? And that's what keeps the being driven continue and the desire for impact continue. Now we can do this much more. We impact millions of people a year, but there is a whole part of India which is not impacted by us. There's rural parts of India which don't have access to diagnostics. There are poor people who don't have access to good quality diagnostics. There are parts of the geographies of India where it's not available. So there's still a lot more to be done. I mean, I can very clearly see the Metropolis journey continuing for decades and decades, where we continue to impact more and more people along the way. So bringing in newer, latest tests, technologies, subsidizing tests for people who are not able to afford it, many of these things, right? On a personal note, I think beyond Metropolis, I think impact for me has been always about, like you said, I've never been driven too much by materialistic things. So I've never craved a plane and a boat and a et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's nice to have some nice things, but I feel overconsumption only leads to more desire for consumption.
Sure.
And frankly, that having lots of things around me doesn't give me excitement. So, one of the decisions I made a couple of years ago, along with Hemant, and we took this call together, was that actually we would like to give majority of our wealth back to society. And I think the next journey for both of us is to say, building a philanthropic foundation. So we already have one. It's called Tiranga Mountain Rescue. Where Hemant drives it primarily, but they do superb work for taking care of soldiers in the mountains and saving lives. I have Empower Us, which is something I've been doing for the last few years. I've kept it small,
Sure.
but the idea of the next chapter will be to really spend a little bit more time building an organization, building a foundation where we're able to use the privilege of that capital and to be able to hopefully do more meaningful things with it. So that will be the next journey.
Lovely. And I think you've already answered this, but I'm still going to just ask one last question. There are only about, I think, 100 odd women-led listed companies on the NSE out of some 2,000 plus companies. When you were maneuvering the world of, the road shows, IPO, listing day, etc., and you're in the minority. Of course, you're leading your company, and so you are the sort of a voice. But is it intimidating? I know you're not the kind to be intimidated, but for someone else who's there tomorrow, what should they expect?
Look, I mean, I think the world of business is predominantly male, and there is an all boys club, and it is patriarchal, and it is the way it is. But it doesn't stop us from doing the things we want to do. And I think that's the important thing to remember, is that at least I don't see people as men and women. I don't see them as through the gender lens. And therefore, if I'm sitting in a room with 20 men and it's me, I don't get intimidated by it, because I trust that I have something unique to bring to the table. A unique opinion, a unique voice, not because I'm female, but because of my experiences, which include being female, but that's not the only thing I am. So I think it's all about your own confidence, about who you are, and whether you have enough to bring to the table that's valuable to the rest of the world, right? And I think building that confidence, nobody else can do. We have to do it for ourselves. And the only way to build that confidence is, like I was mentioning earlier, is to confront the things you're nervous about and get over it. That's the only way. So the short answer is no. I've been, at IPOs, I've gone for road shows, etc., where I was told by the bankers and investors that I was the youngest female to ever. I mean, firstly, they hardly get any women who are doing roadshows for IPOs, because even out of these 100 women you're talking about, probably 80 are professional run businesses.
Sure.
Entrepreneurs are probably 20%.
Yes.
If that.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
So the journey and the experiences are a little bit different. Right? So they said, look, we see once in few years a woman coming for a roadshow. Number one. Number two, young women, though hardly ever happens. And I was pregnant at the time.
Oh my God! So yeah. Oh my God!
This was a unique case for them.
Yeah, they would have turned their heads.
Like how is this happening, right? Because then again, the expectation is, if you're pregnant, you should be at home resting. And I'm like, dude, why? I mean, if I'm capable, I should be walking. I should be out. I should be doing things. And my brain doesn't stop working just because I'm pregnant. So, So I think again, it's just about going on your own journey, and some people will be surprised, some won't be. I've heard lots of people say lovely things about me. I've heard lots of people say bad things about me, and that both are okay.
Ameera, it was so refreshing. It was just wonderful to sit here with you today and have this conversation. We've spoken so many times about business, but today we got to hear a whole lot of learnings and along your journey, and I'm sure many women will find that incredibly valuable. So
You're becoming India's Oprah.
Yes, yes. And I'm glad I got to do this with you.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Aabha.